And happy Saturday morning, and welcome to this 13th edition of the second season of Fantasy Football Come True. You know, you can catch Fantasy Football Come True every week right here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. This is the show that wants to see you put some green in your jeans. I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. I'm joined by my co-host, Ron Fun, today. And also back with us, we have fantasy football aficionado, Mr. Nostradamus Nate. Nate, welcome to the show, my man. Thanks for being here. And Ron, I'm going to start with you. How are you doing this evening, my man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great. As you can see, you know, the Wolfpack made my week this week on a number of occasions. You know, they had a 4 overtime game against Nebraska in basketball, one of the best games I've seen. And then also they put a spanking on them Tar Heels. They made them Tar Heels feel like they were going to win, and then they just put it on them at the end of the game. So,
Ron, kind of like how the Vikings do me every year with that tease, right? They tease Carolina throughout the whole game, and then put the smackdown on them at the end of it.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think Ron Fun just likes bringing up old stuff, Nate. That's all. Nostradamus Nate, what about you, man? How are you doing this evening? Or this morning, excuse me. I'm ready for it to be evening time already. What's wrong with me? But, you know, I'm ready for these college football because today we got college football championship weekend, trying to figure out if the top 4 is still going to stay the same. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Nate, how are you, my man?
Yeah, life is grand. Enjoyed a terrific turkey day last week, full of food, family, and football, of course. 3 of my favorite things in life. I don't know about y'all. But now I'm really pumped to be back with you brothers to wrap about the week 13 slate. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Nate. And you said it, man. We are in week 13, and we're coming down to that final stretch of the season. And not only do things get interesting for the teams out there, but it gets interesting for the fantasy football players as well. So we're going to get into the meat of our show. And, of course, I want to discuss a few heartbreaks that kind of happened last week. One heartbreak is Cam Newton, quarterback, Carolina Panthers. This guy came out, you know, great against the Cardinals, although he had limited play. Then he lost to Washington. But, oh, my goodness, last week he stank up the joint against Miami down in sunny South Florida. How do you stink up the joint down there? Cam Newton had basically 6 fantasy points against the Dolphins. To me, that's the problem. I know he's great for the locker room. I know he's great for selling tickets. But this dude is killing fantasy owners. Nate, Ron Fun, whoever wants to go first. Would you guys from this season on consider even taking a chance on a guy like Cam Newton?
Man, that's a good question. Whether or not you're talking about fantasy football is one thing versus real life. In real life,
right,
they need to utilize Cam Newton only in the red zone. Allow their number one quarterback, whether or not it's even if it's PJ Walker as their number one quarterback, use him from the 0-yard line to the 80, and then from the 80 to the 100. Or the red zone, essentially, use Cam Newton because he is very efficient in the red zone. Just not so much with the new playbook, 3rd week with a team. When we're in week 13, it's hard to execute to excellence.
Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. Nate, what about the other side of that, Nate?
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry, Nate. I was going. Okay.
Yeah. So I agree with Ron. I think, you know, what you said, Ron, is what they're going to end up doing. I mean, you saw their backup come in towards the end of this last game. So I think they're going to do the 2 quarterback scenario. So from a fantasy perspective, you can't afford to be rostering a quarterback that's not going to see 100% of the snaps, right? Because that doesn't maximize your fantasy output. And, you know, just in general, Cam, he's dust. He's not the Cam that we're accustomed to have seen. And it was shown in New England as well, right? Especially from a throwing standpoint. You know, his accuracy is no longer there and doesn't have that deep ball capability. And so, yeah, I'm out on him in real life and certainly in fantasy.
No doubt. I feel you. And then, of course, there was another heartbreak. Ron Fun, this heartbreak is kind of, you know, angled toward you because you're a huge Nick Chubb fan. And, of course, I was talking to another fantasy owner, and he was saying that he was upset because Nick Chubb had done so well in the past, man, but not so well last week against the Ravens. And he was just wondering what was going on. And, of course, my conversation was like, look, dude, Nick Chubb is a great running back. But you might want to think twice and listen to what we say on fantasy, especially Ron Fun. You don't want to start any running back against that Ravens defense, because the probability of that blowing up in your face is going to happen more often than not. Ron Fun, I got to talk to you about Nick Chubb. You're a big time Browns season ticket holder. Do you see Nick Chubb bouncing back this week?
Yeah, I see the bounce back happening for the Browns, but I don't think the bounce back is going to be as high as people expect. Okay. The reason being, in order to have an effective run game, you need to have an effective pass game. To have an effective pass game, you need to have an effective running game. Well, right now, Baker Mayfield has shown that he's not really a franchise quarterback right now, given that he's hurt, given that he's playing hurt. In addition, we have several injuries across our team. We got Kareem Hunt just coming back. We have other key folks that are injured. And so if a team doesn't believe that we can throw the ball downfield, then they can just stack the box with 8 and have, one high safety and 2 corners or et cetera. And so that's what we've been seeing. And until Baker Mayfield steps up and shows that he can throw an isolation ball or a one-on-one ball or et cetera to his players.
Well, hopefully he'll be able to do that soon. At least to get Nick Chubb back in the groove, man. And of course, you guys are talking great about the Thanksgiving weekend. My Thanksgiving weekend was not that great simply because my Cowboys lost on Thanksgiving evening, a heartbreaker to the Raiders, but that was a high-scoring game. I didn't really do too much fantasy football last week on Thanksgiving, but what about you, Nate? I know you're a fantasy football aficionado. You are going to do fantasy football, rain, sleet, sunshine, and it doesn't matter. How did your week go last week?
I did get some action on this past Sunday, and from a DFS perspective, my week 12 was really nice. Got a nice chunk of change added to the DK account. So we consistently talk on this show about targeting those high total games as well as playing the ownership game. So those are 2 kind of key tactics we really preach on this show, and I did just that in week 12. So followed that highest game total, Bucks versus Indy game, and also played the kind of ownership game in that game. And whereas a lot of folks were going with the Godwin and Evans, I chose to stack Brady with Fournette and Gronk, and both Fournette and Gronk smashed for me. I think Fournette got over 40 points, right, and Gronk added 22 points to my score. So that was great. Ironically, even though the Bucs scored 38 points, Brady didn't get near paying his price tag. So that hurt me a little bit. But in those same lineups, I made up for that by skinny stacking the second highest total game of the week, the Vikes versus the Niners, right? And so I did so through owning Thielen and the chalky Debo, right? Debo Samuel, and both smashed. They helped me get pretty deep into the green. So again, it was all about following the points in those 2 highest total games, and specifically choosing high upside players that were projected for lower ownership and getting leverage on the more common plays from those games that other fantasy players were playing in the tournaments that I was in. So, this kind of process really has brought us to the victory land in the past. It's a winning formula.
Yeah, you definitely mentioned it, basically that winning formula, that process that we have to stay with. And Ron, any elements of that fantasy football process that you just want to kind of remind fans of before we move on?
Yeah, we usually cover it in a games of the week section, but you really have to pick the highest scoring game for the week and try to get exposure to those games. And sometimes Vegas is wrong. Oftentimes Vegas is wrong. So, which is why we do that segment, and which is why we try to come up with games to fade. I remember a couple of weeks ago when the Chiefs played Dallas Cowboys. That was the highest expected game on the slate. I told you guys, I was like, I'm picking one that's in the 40s. I felt like that particular game had the best points, and you guys did a head scratcher. But you know what? Leaning in on that game gave me leverage against the field because Dallas Chiefs was a low scoring game, and I was actually right about the Vikings that particular week having a high scoring game. And so, you really have to do your work, and it's not just relying on Vegas. It's looking at what weak defenses are going against strong offenses or strong individual players where that game script lines up. And so I'm going to stop there. But that's really the formula, week in, week out. It works. Other people do different strategies. We might not be 100%, but we're definitely above our 55, 56, 60% that you need to have in order to be profitable at DFS.
Ron, you're exactly right. And part of this thing, as Nate was alluding to earlier, got to try and pick those high-scoring games so you can pull some points out of their fantasy audience. So make sure you're listening to these two guys because they know exactly what we're talking about. So we're up against the break, but coming up, Ron Fun, Nostradamus Nate, we'll be responding to some listeners who want to know what players they should start or sit. And that's going to be in our Start 'em or Sit 'em segment coming up for week 13. But just before we get there, Nate is going to be giving us, the audience, a quick slate overview of this upcoming week in fantasy football come true. And that's next, so stay right here with us. And welcome back to Fantasy Football Come True, where you get us right here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio every Saturday morning. I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. I'm here with co-host Ron Fun, and we are joined by the fantasy playmaker himself, Mr. Nostradamus Nate. Ron Fun, before we take a look at this week's matchup, you know, we just want to say, hey, it's going to be a fun week. And Ron Fun, I know your daggone NC State beat my Tar Heels, but I got something for you coming soon. So don't you worry about that, all right? But we're gonna look at some matchups coming up this week of week 13. And remember this show, guys, we like to find those value players if they are there. But we do have some pretty good contests coming up. We got the Colts taking on the Texans, huge divisional game. Vikings taking on the Lions, Giants at Dolphins in another divisional game. The Bucs are at the Falcons, Cardinals at the Bears, Jacksonville, LA Rams, Baltimore Ravens are taking on the Steelers. Washington is going to be out west seeing Las Vegas, the Raiders, and the Eagles will be at the New York Jets. And of course, the 49ers will be taking on those Seahawks, which Ron Fun, I hadn't seen you wearing a lot of Seahawk gear right recently, but we'll just stay there. But before we get into which games you guys like best, Nate, do you mind giving us a quick update on maybe what the injury report possibly looks like for going into tomorrow's game and any other relevant news that our fantasy audience could benefit from this week?
Sure. Yeah, I'll sprinkle in the injury scenario by saying that, I really think that the differentiator in winning and losing on this week 13 DK slate is all around your choice at the running back position, right? So there is a ton of really great plays, smash plays at running back. So it's just going to be all about which 2 or 3 you choose to go with if you do running back in the flex. Just talking through the injury situation, last week, I saw on Turkey Day, DeAndre Swift went down. So that puts a 5.4K Jamal Williams in the lead spot there in Detroit, facing my Vikings' pretty poor run defense. So, that's an option. Antonio Gibson is facing the Raiders and their 4th worst rushing defense. And injury comes into play there because J.D. McKissick, his running back mate there in the backfield, he went down with a concussion that's been ruled out. So Antonio Gibson could possibly, get even more play, specifically in the pass game. So that just jacks up his PPR potential. And so there's a couple others. So Darrell Henderson got banged up this past week. And so his backup is Sony Michel. And he's probably the lowest of the running back scenarios from a price standpoint that could really pay off if, again, Darrell Henderson is, in fact, ruled out because he's sitting at 4.3K. And you put in a 4.3K running back, and you can do a lot with your lineups there with the rest of that cash. And then finally, Alexander Madison is stepping into the big dog lead role for my Vikes, that run-heavy offense. So having any main dog in that offense from a running back standpoint is great. And, he has really played a very, very similar role as Dalvin Cook has played, when Dalvin Cook has been non-injured. So you got to absolutely evaluate him. But the interesting thing about him is his price tag is at 7.6K. So it's relatively high, but you should absolutely consider that. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more around whether or not we should insert any of these guys into our lineups later on.
Yeah, we definitely will. I'm very interested in seeing Madison on tomorrow when he plays, man, because Dalvin Cook is hard to replace, and we know the kind of points that Dalvin Cook puts up. But I tell you what, I am looking forward to that matchup and seeing what Madison does as a backup running back. As we say, next man up a lot of times. So Ron Fun, we just heard the matchups, and I'm gonna start with you. What matchups have your pockets heating up that you're liking for tomorrow's games?
I'm most excited about the Washington football team going against the Las Vegas Raiders. And I know that's, again, an odd one. It's not the highest on the slate. But if you look at the teams that give up the most points against quarterbacks, it's the Washington football team. If you look at the team that gives up the most points against wide receivers, it's the Washington football team. They give up 29 points average against receivers. And they give up 25 points against quarterbacks. So I don't just start there and end there, but you also got to go to the next phase of the game. You got to say, all right, who is the quarterback? Well, you know what? They're going against Derek Carr. Derek Carr is $6,000. That's pretty cheap for a quarterback. Additionally, Derek Carr is averaging over 300 yards a game for the season. So if you plug him in your lineup, you can possibly get the bonus points for the 300 yards a game. And then also they've had some trouble at receiver over there. So you kind of can be very, very particular about who's going to get passes. And so the one player that Derek Carr is going to throw to that's super cheap is Moreau, Foster Moreau. He's coming in at $2,700. He's a tight end. The tight end puts in major work, whether or not it's Waller or the backup. The tight end gets lots of touches. And I feel like if you're going to get 8 targets in a game for $2,700, that's worth putting in there. So that game has me excited. I believe Vegas is wrong about the scoring in that game. Also, the Washington football team is coming on here. And just as Nostradamus Nate mentioned, Antonio Gibson is priced pretty cheap. He's priced at get the number.
I think he's priced at 5,700. I think he's at 5,700. Yeah,
priced at 5,700, and he's had 29 touches last week, 29 rushing attempts, seven pass catches, and then the week before he had 19, and then in the week before he had 24 rushing attempps. So early in the season, Antonio Gibson was hurt, which is why his value is suppressed. But the last 3 weeks, he's come on. He's actually getting full practices now, and so at 5,700, I'm salivating over that. And so I think there's going to be more points for cheap guys to actually outpace their point projections.
No doubt. Yeah. Nostradamus Nate, what about you, my man? Who you got coming up? What games are making your pockets heat up over there, Nate?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I love that Raiders v. Washington football team contest. I'll actually throw in a couple of Derek Carr's pass catchers that you should evaluate. Third and Renfro, baby. Hunter Renfro. You mentioned Waller is out, so Moreau is absolutely a great value price at 2.7K. You can do a lot with your lineup when you put in a 2.7K tight end, right? But Hunter Renfro, I think, is going to take a good amount of the volume that Waller saw as well. So certainly a lot of it's going to go to Foster Moreau, but Hunter Renfro runs those, short to medium routes, and so could have an uptick in his target volume. But hey, we all saw old Dusty D-Jax go off on Turkey Day, so I don't think he's washed. I think he's still got some gas in the tank. So you should absolutely consider D-Jax at, a really low price. I think he's at 4.2K, right? So another opportunity to save some dollars to allocate to other higher price guys. So like that game, but the game that I'm really eyeing up is, this game that's sitting at, I think it's 49.5, and it's the Chargers v. Bengals matchup, right? So, I really like the prospect of stacking Burrow with either Jamar Chase or Higgins, right? So I think Jamar Chase, especially because he's had almost 4 or 5 games that he's been mediocre at best, I think he's primed for a bounce back. And because he's had mediocre performance over the past 4 or 5 games, he's going to be at low ownership, right? So you could get some leverage on the field by pairing him with Burrow, but Higgins is finally seeing some production from all those air yards that he's been getting all season. I think he's in the top 5 in terms of air yards that he's seen with regards to the whole league. So a lot of upside there. And I actually probably am going to fade Joe Mixon in my Bengals stacks because I can get leverage off of the field that I think is going to flock to Joe Mixon, right? Because he's had about 4 straight weeks of really strong play, including, last game where he got in the box a few times. So I think people are going to flock to him, and there's a good leverage opportunity by stacking Burrow with either Higgins or Chase.
Hey, sounds great. Ron Fun, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I want to ask Nate, given that Mixon's had good production and he's going up against a weak Chargers run defense, how do you think about, I know you said his price, but is he strong enough? Maybe you keep him in your tournament plays, or he's in your player pool, or do you just avoid him because of the price is 8,100? But it's kind of interesting that he's going up against the weak Chargers run defense.
Yeah. And that's why I'm going to fade him, because all the other fantasy players are going to see that and, go with him. And there's that then opportunity to get leverage off of him with, the pass catchers in that game. So it's strictly a tournament strategy by, rolling or, excluding essentially him from my running back pool. But also, we said at the top, there's all kinds of other great options, both at, around Mixon's price range, and then all those value opportunities that injuries have freed up. So I'm going to, kind of use my running back roster spot for those value plays, or, those lower owned, high priced running backs. And I just think Mixon, of those higher price running backs, is going to be over owned in my opinion, and would rather go with like a Jonathan Taylor or somebody, that's up there in price.
Okay.
Excellent work, fellas. Great analysis. But you guys know, as we're running out of time, this is the part of the show where we want to try and answer just a couple questions for some listeners. We got some emails in, and we've been sent some players and that would want to be advised on whether or not they should start or sit. Ron Fun, I'm going to start with you. This email is from William Penn. William Penn says, hey, Ron Fun, Dalvin Cook is out for this week. You guys always believe in the next man up. Is it true? This week, should I start Alexander Madison, running back for the Vikings, at $7,600 this week? Do I start or sit him? Ron Fun, what do you tell him?
My heart of hearts, I say you got to sit Alexander Madison. You got to sit him this week. I know that's kind of controversial, but $7,600 is pretty expensive to me. $7,600 means you got to get at least 23 points for him actually to pay off. And honestly, if you've been watching the Detroit Lions games, they actually play good defense. They actually play very well. They just lose every single game except for one against the Steelers. But they play teams very, very close. And so I think that they're going to play the Vikings very close. I think it's not going to be as much of an opportunity for Alexander Madison. And also, given that he's going to be the only workhorse and they might not trust the second back, I think it's going to be less production, less volume from him. And I actually think more of the pass catchers have a chance to win here in this particular game, even though you're supposed to beat Detroit Lions on the ground and he's lining up. I sit him, sir. Sit him. Save you some money.
Okay. All right. Ron Fun. William Penn, you heard it from Ron Fun. He said you need to sit Alexander Madison. We've got another email. Nate, this is for you. This email is from Ben Henderson. Ben Henderson says, hey, guys, I'm a big San Francisco fan. Do I sit or start George Kittle? He had a bad week last week. Does he have a bounce back week? Nate, what do you do with George Kittle at tight end?
Yeah, he did put up a dud last game against my Vikes. But I think that's actually one reason that you start him this week in a bounce back spot at lower ownership, because folks, saw that dud of a game. And except for the first game when he returned from injury, the 2 previous games to the last dud were, very average. So again, I think because he's at the top of the price range for tight ends, he's going to be low owned because of that low production. And so a good reason to put him in your lineup. But the other reason is getting back to the injuries. Deebo Samuel, he's out, right? And so his volume needs to go somewhere. I think a lot of fantasy gamers are going to think that it's going to go to either Brandon Ayuk or that the Niners are going to turn to a more run-heavy offense. So that may be the case, but I really think they're going to pump more volume to George Kittle. I think some of Deebo's volume is going to go to Kittle. So I think that sets him up to have, again, a really big bounce back, if not just, breakout game, which he hasn't had throughout this whole season, where he could put up 100 plus and a couple tutties and, really bring you home. So I think you absolutely start Mr. George Kittle.
Sounds good, Nate. Well, Ben Henderson, you heard it directly from Nostradamus Nate. You start George Kittle, tight end for the San Francisco 49ers this week. And guys, you know what? As they say, when you're having fun, time always flies, and we're getting right down here to the end. But before we get ready and leave, any nuggets, any nasty picks out there that you guys just might want to throw out to our fantasy audience who's listening?
Nasty throw one out there. Nostradamus Nate's nasty pick of the week. This one hurts because it's actually going against my Vikings. Vikes have an incredibly porous pass defense. And so we saw on Turkey Day this guy named Josh Reynolds, right? He got in the box, and he's playing, with his former QB when they were both in Rams land, right? So he's got that chemistry. But not only did he have a good game on Turkey Day, he also had a lot more opportunity for getting more upside. So at a really low price point, throwing Josh Reynolds at my chagrin, he might run all over my Vikings. And to Ron's point earlier, keep him close in this game, but certainly hope that he doesn't do enough to beat him.
Good deal. All right, Reynolds, keep him close. Ron Fun, anybody for you?
Man, my nasty pick of the week, man, I said it before, is Foster Moreau. He's so cheap. You got to have him in your lineups. And if I had to pick a second one, it would actually be the tight end Conklin, because that running back is not going to get the production that he needs. And typically when the running back doesn't perform, or if they do the play action off the running back because people are expecting the running back, linebackers come up and they can hit it to the tight end. So Conklin would also be my next nasty pick of the week.
No doubt. Well, I appreciate you guys and fantasy audience out there. We have reached the end of our show, but you heard it from Ron Fun and Nostradamus Nate, our picks of the week, and who you should keep your fantasy eyes on tomorrow. But if you ever need to reach out and get any of these guys, you can. So guys, let them know if they need to get you. How can they get a hold of you? Nate?
So again, a social media dinosaur, but I am on Facebook. Feel free to hit me up. My last name is Norstrud, spelled Norstrud. I'm obviously real close with my main man, Ron, and he's a social media giant. So you can hit him up if you want to get in contact with me. What I should say is you should hit up my wife. She's a social media queen, right? So, she's all over Instagram. But yeah, happy to help out, with any questions you have going into Sunday.
No doubt. Ron Fun, let everybody know how they can get you, my man.
Hey, everybody can get me on every major platform with the handle @RonFun on Twitter, Instagram, all of that stuff. And then also, if you've enjoyed it, please subscribe to whatever format you listen to. If you listen to us on the radio, please subscribe so you get the message every week when we come on the radio. If it's on Facebook, please hit the subscribe button. Facebook has been really, really strong. And then if you're on YouTube, hey, hit the subscribe button there as well.
No doubt. Well, thank you, fantasy audience, and thank you, Ron Fun and Nostradamus Nate. And of course, on behalf of my co-hosts, and I might as well say the regular panel, Ron Fun and our special guest, Nostradamus Nate, I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. Make sure you tune in next week to another edition of Fantasy Football Come True right here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. This is the only fantasy show that wants to see you put some money in your pocket.